The rope was already around her neck when the quiet cowboy first saw her. She stood beneath the old cottonwood tree, her hands tied behind her back, while her own people watched with faces carved from stone. The Apache girl had brought shame upon her tribe, they said. Now she would pay the price. From the edge of the clearing, a stranger watched. He sat on his horse, still as the desert rocks, his weathered face showing nothing. But something in the girl's eyes made him lean forward in his saddle. What did this quiet cowboy see that no one else could? What made him risk everything to defy the sacred judgment of an entire tribe? Her name was Nia, and she had always been different from the other girls in her tribe. While they learned to weave baskets and prepare meals in silence, Nia asked questions. While they kept their eyes down when the warriors passed, she looked them straight in the face. Her mother had warned her many times that such behavior would bring trouble, but Nia believed that being true to herself was worth any risk. The trouble came in the form of a warrior named Kuruk. He was known throughout the tribe for his skill with weapons and his victories in battle. He was also known for his cruel temper and the way he treated his horses. When they failed him, he beat them until they could barely stand. When servants brought him food that was not to his liking, he threw it in their faces. But because he was a great warrior, the elders looked the other way. When Kuruk decided he wanted Nia as his wife, everyone assumed she would be honored. Her father certainly was. Having Kuruk as a son would raise their family standing in the tribe. The wedding would bring gifts and celebrations. It was decided without anyone asking Nia what she wanted. But when Kuruk came to claim her, Nia did something no Apache girl had ever done. She refused him. In front of the entire tribe, she said no. She would not marry a man who found joy in causing pain. She would not spend her life with someone whose heart was as hard as the desert stones. The silence that followed her words was deeper than any canyon. Kuruk's face turned dark with rage. Her father fell to his knees, begging forgiveness for his daughter's words. The tribal elders gathered in a circle, their faces grim. And refusing Kuruk, Nia had not just rejected a warrior. She had challenged the ancient ways of their people. She had brought shame upon her family, her clan, and the entire tribe. The punishment for such shame was death. The quiet cowboy's name was Caleb, though few people knew it. He had been riding alone for 3 years, ever since the fever took his wife and daughter. He spoke only when necessary, and kept his distance from others. The pain of his loss had carved deep lines in his face, and turned his heart into something that barely remembered how to feel. He drifted from town to town, taking work where he could find it, never staying long enough to make friends or enemies. He had been tracking a wild Mustang when he came upon the Apache camp. Hidden in the rocks above, he watched as they prepared for what was clearly an execution. He had no business interfering with tribal justice. These were not his people, and this was not his fight. He should have ridden away. But something about the girl standing beneath that tree held him in place. Maybe it was the way she stood so straight, even with death looking her in the face. Maybe it was how young she was, probably no more than 17 summers. Or maybe it was something in her eyes that reminded him of his own daughter, who had also been brave beyond her years. Whatever it was, Caleb found himself checking the knife at his belt and measuring the distance between his horse and the tree. The chief of the tribe stood before Nia, his voice heavy with sorrow. He had known her since she was born, had watched her grow into a young woman of unusual spirit. But the law was the law. Tradition was what held their people together in a world that grew more dangerous every day. If one person could defy tradition and live, soon everyone would think they could do the same. Then what would become of their way of life? He asked Nia if she had any last words. She lifted her chin and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the camp. She said she was not ashamed of speaking the truth. She said that real shame came from staying silent when you saw wrong being done. She said she would rather die standing for what was right than live on her knees before a cruel man. Some of the women in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes, though they tried to hide it. Even some of the warriors shifted uncomfortably. They all knew about Kuruk's temper. They all seen his cruelty. But tradition was tradition, and the price for breaking it had always been the same. The chief nodded to the warriors. 2 of them stepped forward and lifted Nia onto a wooden box beneath the tree branch. The rope was placed around her neck. The chief raised his hand, ready to give the signal that would kick the box away and end Mia's life. That was when Caleb moved. He didn't charge in with guns blazing like some hero from a story. He simply rode forward at a steady pace, as if he had every right to be there. The Apache warriors were so surprised that for a moment, nobody moved. By the time they reached for their weapons, Caleb was already at the tree. In one smooth motion, he drew his knife and cut the rope just as the box was kicked away. Nia dropped, but instead of falling to her death, she fell into Caleb's arms. He caught her gently, as if she weighed nothing at all, and held her against his chest. She was gasping for air. The rope had been tight around her throat, but she was alive. The warriors surrounded them immediately, arrows pointed at Caleb's heart. Kuruk pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with fury. He demanded that the stranger be killed along with the girl. This outsider had no right to interfere with tribal justice. But Caleb didn't reach for his gun. He didn't try to fight or run. He simply looked at the chief, and in his eyes was a sorrow so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Without saying a word, he told a story of loss and pain that the chief recognized. Here was a man who had already lost everything that mattered. Here was someone who understood that some things were worth more than life itself. The chief stood frozen for a long moment. The law said both the girl and the stranger should die. Tradition demanded it. But something in the quiet cowboy's eyes spoke of a different kind of law, one written on the heart instead of in ancient rules. The chief thought of his own daughters. He thought of all the times he had seen Kuruk's cruelty and said nothing. He thought of what courage it must have taken for Nia to speak the truth. Finally, the chief raised his hand. The warriors lowered their weapons, confusion clear on their faces. Kuruk started to protest, but the chief silenced him with a look. In a voice that surprised everyone, including himself, the chief told Caleb to take the girl and go. He gave them until sunset to be gone from Apache land. After that, if they were found, they would be killed on sight. Caleb nodded once, a gesture of respect and understanding. He lifted Mia onto his horse, then climbed up behind her. She was still struggling to breathe, her throat bruised from the rope, but she was conscious. As they rode away, she looked back at her people one last time. Her father stood with his head bowed in shame. Her mother watched with tears streaming down her face. The other members of the tribe stared in shocked silence. But Kuruk was not one to accept defeat. As Caleb and Nia disappeared into the desert, he began making plans. The chief might have let them go, but Kuruk's honor had been damaged beyond repair. A girl had refused him, and a stranger had made him look weak in front of his people. This could not stand. 3 days passed. Caleb had found a hidden canyon with fresh water and good shelter. He tended to Nia's injuries with surprising gentleness. He made poultices from desert plants to ease the pain in her throat. He caught rabbits and cooked them over small fires that made little smoke. He spoke very little, but his actions said everything. He was keeping her safe. Nia, for her part, was grateful but confused. She didn't understand why this stranger had saved her. When she finally found her voice enough to ask, Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he told her about his daughter, who had been about Nia's age when the fever took her. He told her how his daughter had also been brave, had also stood up for what was right even when it was dangerous. He said he couldn't save his daughter, but maybe he could save someone else's. On the 4th day, Kuruk found them. He had brought 5 warriors with him, men who owed him favors or feared his anger. They had tracked Caleb and Nia to the canyon and blocked the only way out. Kuruk called out that he was taking back what was his. The girl would return with him, and the stranger would die for his interference. Nia surprised everyone, including Caleb, by walking out to face them. Her voice was still rough from the rope, but it was strong. She told the warriors about all the times she had seen Kuruk hurt those weaker than himself. She spoke of horses beaten until they died, of servants scarred by his anger, of women who lived in fear of his temper. She asked them if this was really the man they wanted to follow, if this was the kind of warrior they wanted to be. The 5 warriors looked uncomfortable. They had all seen these things too. They had all chosen to look away because it was easier than standing up to Kuruk. But hearing it spoken out loud by this brave girl made them see their own cowardice. Kuruk, enraged by her words, raised his war club to strike her down. But Caleb was faster. He stepped between them, and for the first time, he showed why he had survived so long riding alone through dangerous country. He didn't kill Kuruk, though he could have. Instead, he disarmed him with moves so quick and precise that Kuruk was on the ground before he knew what had happened. Caleb's knife was in his throat, but he didn't press it home. At that moment, the chief arrived with more warriors. He had followed Kuruk, knowing the warrior would not accept his judgment. The chief had seen everything, had heard Nia's words, and witnessed her courage. He had seen Caleb defeat Kuruk without taking his life, showing mercy even to an enemy. The chief made a decision that would be talked about in the tribe for generations. He banished Kuruk for defying his orders and for the cruelty that Nia had bravely exposed. He declared that Mia's honor had never been lost. She had shown more courage than most warriors by speaking truth to power. She was free to choose her own path, to stay with the tribe or leave as she wished. Mia looked at her people, then at Caleb. This quiet cowboy had risked everything for her when her own people would have let her die. He had shown her kindness when the world had shown her only hardness. Her choice was clear. She chose to go with Caleb. They rode away together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Two lonely souls who had found each other in the most unlikely way. Neither knew what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, neither of them would face it alone. The tribe watched them go in silence. Some of the elders shook their heads, worried about what this would mean for their traditions. But some of the younger people, especially the women, watched with something like hope in their eyes. Maybe change wasn't always a bad thing. Maybe sometimes it took an outsider to help you see what had been wrong all along. As for Caleb and Mia, they rode into the vast desert, toward whatever destiny awaited them. They had both learned that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it means standing up to an entire tribe. Sometimes it means cutting a rope and catching someone as they fall. And sometimes it means choosing to care again after your heart has been broken. The desert wind carried their story across the land, and in time, it became legend. The tale of the Apache girl who refused to bow to cruelty, and the quiet cowboy who reminded an entire tribe what honor really meant. It was proof that one act of kindness, one moment of courage, could change everything, and that sometimes the quietest people are the ones who speak the loudest when it matters most.